My father said I was too emotional to run the family company and gave it to my brother. He had no idea I had been making all the important decisions for 3 years. My name is Ana Silva, and I spent 8 years watching my father build Silva Construction into a regional powerhouse, while secretly running every aspect of the business he thought I was too unstable to handle. What he didn't know was that his golden boy couldn't even balance a checkbook, let alone manage a multi-million-dollar operation. The company had been Dad's life since 1987, when he started with a pickup truck and a toolbox, building it into one of the largest commercial contractors in the region. When I graduated from university with degrees in business administration and engineering, Silva Construction employed over 200 people and handled projects worth tens of millions annually. Dad always assumed my brother Bruno would eventually take over, despite Bruno's complete lack of interest in anything beyond the minimum necessary to receive his paycheck. Meanwhile, I had worked there every summer since high school, learning every department from the ground up, while Dad dismissed my contributions as helping, rather than real business experience. The turning point came during my senior year, when Dad had his first heart attack at 62. While he was recovering in the hospital, Bruno was supposed to handle operations. But within 2 weeks, everything started falling apart. Suppliers weren't being paid, project schedules became chaotic, and we almost lost our biggest client due to missed deadlines and poor communication. That's when I stepped in, not officially, working 18 hours a day to fix the disasters Bruno had created through negligence and incompetence. That I reorganized the project management system, negotiated with angry suppliers, and personally called each client to resolve issues. Dad never knew because Bruno took credit for the recovery when Dad returned to work. "Look, Bruno handled everything perfectly while I was gone," Dad would say proudly to people. "The boy has true leadership instincts." Bruno would smile and nod while I sat there, knowing I had saved the company from possible bankruptcy during those critical weeks. After that crisis, I realized Bruno needed constant support to maintain even basic functionality. So I started secretly managing his responsibilities. Every morning, I would arrive early to review his schedule and prepare briefings on what he needed to accomplish. I would draft his emails, create his presentations, and even coach him on what to say during important meetings. The system worked because Bruno was smart enough to recognize he was in trouble and grateful for the help, while Dad remained convinced his son was naturally talented at business leadership. Meanwhile, I was officially just the operations coordinator, a position Dad created to keep me busy without giving me real authority. The financial analysis that convinced Dad to expand into renewable energy projects. I spent 3 months researching market trends and building financial models while Bruno played golf. The new safety protocols that reduced our accident rate by 40%. I developed those after studying safety regulations and industry best practices for weeks. The contract negotiation strategy that brought us the Morrison Medical Center project, our biggest job ever. I wrote the entire proposal, created the pricing structure, and coached Bruno through each meeting. When we won the $1 million contract, Dad took Bruno out to a celebratory dinner, while I worked late finalizing the project setup. Dad's favorite phrase was, "Bruno has a killer instinct for this business," usually followed by some comment about how I was too emotional or too sensitive for high-stakes decision-making. He would point to Bruno's calm behavior during meetings as evidence of natural leadership, without realizing Bruno seemed calm because I had prepared him for every possible question and scenario. The irony was that Dad valued exactly the qualities in Bruno that he criticized in me. When I showed passion for the business or invested myself in solving problems, Dad called it emotional instability. When Bruno displayed the same information I had given him with practiced confidence, Dad called it executive presence. The breaking point came in early 2019, when Dad announced his retirement plans during our annual company meeting. He stood in front of the conference room, looking at our employees and key clients, and declared that Bruno would take over as president and CEO in 6 months. Bruno has proven to be a natural leader who can handle pressure and make tough decisions, Dad said while Bruno sat next to him, trying to look presidential. "He has the temperament and vision this company needs for the next generation." I sat in the back row, feeling my chest tighten, as Dad continued praising Bruno's business instincts and strategic thinking, all the qualities Bruno had only demonstrated because I had been feeding him information and strategies for years. The applause was enthusiastic, because the employees genuinely liked Bruno as a person, even though they had no idea how little he actually contributed. After the meeting, I asked Dad if we could talk privately in his office. I closed the door and tried to explain that I had been handling much more responsibility than my job title suggested, and that perhaps we should discuss my role in the transition. Dad cut me off before I could finish. "Anna, I know you work hard, and you'll always have a place here," he said in that condescending tone I'd learned to hate. But leadership isn't about working hard. It's about making decisions under pressure without getting emotional about it. Bruno has that natural ability. When I tried to give specific examples of projects I had managed or problems I had solved, Dad dismissed them as support work instead of real leadership. In his mind, I was a valuable assistant who helped Bruno succeed, not someone capable of leading independently. That night, I went home to my apartment and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to work in Bruno's shadow, I would document every aspect of my actual contributions and build evidence of what I had really done for the company. If Dad wouldn't recognize my capabilities voluntarily, maybe I could prove them undeniably. I started by going through my computer files and gathering every analysis, proposal, and strategic document I had created in the previous 3 years. The evidence was overwhelming once I systematically organized financial models that had guided major investment decisions, market research that had identified new opportunities, operational improvements that had saved hundreds of thousands in costs. Next, I compiled email threads showing how I had coached Bruno through negotiations, provided talking points for client meetings, and solved problems he couldn't handle independently. The pattern was clear and consistent. I would identify issues, develop solutions, and then help Bruno present them as his own insights. The most damning evidence was a series of recorded phone calls I had made to clients during various crises over the past 2 years. Dad had no idea I was the one maintaining those relationships when things went wrong, because Bruno would claim credit during follow-up meetings when everything was resolved. Armed with this documentation, I requested another meeting with Dad, this time bringing printed copies of everything I had compiled. I spread the evidence across his desk and walked him through the timeline of my actual contributions versus Bruno's official responsibilities. Dad's face went through several changes as he reviewed the materials. First, confusion, then disbelief, then something that might have been recognition, but instead of acknowledging what the evidence showed, he got defensive. "This doesn't change anything," he said, pushing the papers back across the desk. "Supporting Bruno is exactly what I would expect from a good team player. It proves you work well under his leadership." I looked at him in disbelief. Even with documented proof that I had been making the decisions Bruno received credit for, Dad was reframing it as evidence of Bruno's leadership instead of my capabilities. The mental gymnastics were breathtaking. "Dad, Bruno didn't make these decisions," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I made them. He presented my work because I prepared him to do so. Without my support, he would have failed completely during your heart attack." Dad's expression hardened. "You're being emotional again, Anna. That's exactly what I'm talking about. A true leader doesn't need to take credit for every little contribution. Bruno knows how to delegate effectively and build team loyalty." The conversation deteriorated from there, as Dad became more entrenched in his position and I grew more frustrated trying to break through his willful blindness. Finally, he ended the meeting by saying that if I couldn't support Bruno's leadership transition without causing drama, maybe I should consider whether Silva Construction was the right place for me. That threat crystallized everything for me. Dad would rather lose me than admit he'd been wrong about Bruno's abilities or my potential. I was being punished for being too successful in the shadows, making Bruno look good at the cost of my own recognition. I left Dad's office knowing that nothing I said or showed would change his mind. His identity was too wrapped up in the narrative of Bruno as his natural successor and me as the emotional daughter who needed to be managed instead of empowered. That night, I called my friend Sandra Kinn, who worked as a recruiter for executive positions in construction and engineering. I explained my situation and asked if she knew of opportunities that might match my actual experience. Sandra laughed when I described the gap between my responsibilities and recognition. "Anna, you've been running a major construction company for 3 years. Every firm in the region would kill to hire someone with your track record if they knew what you've actually accomplished." Within 2 weeks, Sandra had arranged interviews with 3 different companies, including Meridian Construction, Silva Construction's largest competitor. I updated my resume to reflect my actual contributions, using metrics and project results that demonstrated real leadership experience instead of just support roles. The interview with Meridian's CEO, Patricia Morrison, was different from anything I had experienced at Silva Construction. She asked detailed questions about my decision-making process, my approach to solving problems, and my vision for the industry's future. For the first time in years, someone was evaluating my actual capabilities instead of dismissing them. Your experience running operations at Silva is impressive, Patricia said, reviewing my portfolio of completed projects. But what interests me most is your strategic thinking about market expansion and operational efficiency. It's exactly what we need for our next growth phase. She offered me a position as Vice President of Operations with a 40% salary increase and equity participation in the company's profits. More importantly, she was offering me the chance to lead openly instead of from the shadows, making decisions and receiving recognition for results. I accepted the offer and submitted my resignation to Dad the next morning. His reaction was predictably dismissive. "I'm disappointed you're being so emotional about the transition," he said, not even asking where I was going or what role I'd been offered. "But if you need to prove something to yourself, I understand. Bruno will be fine without you." Bruno's reaction was different and more honest. He asked to meet me for coffee after work, and when we sat down, he looked genuinely worried. "Anna, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How much of what I've been doing was actually your work?" I appreciated his frankness and decided to give him the truth. "Most of it, Bruno, the financial analysis, strategic planning, client relationship management. You're good at presenting and people like you, but the actual business decisions were mine." His face paled as he processed the implications. "So when I take over next month, I'll be running a company I don't really know how to run." It wasn't a question. I felt sorry for him because he had been set up to fail by Dad's favoritism and reluctance to provide real training or honest feedback about his capabilities. But I also couldn't continue sacrificing my career to protect him from consequences he needed to face. "Bruno, you're smart enough to learn this business if you really commit," I told him. "But you'll need to stop coasting and start taking responsibility for your own development. Dad isn't helping you by giving you credit for work you didn't do." My last day at Silva Construction was surreal. Dad treated it as if I were going on vacation instead of leaving permanently, while Bruno looked increasingly panicked as the reality of his situation set in. Other employees threw a small farewell party, several of them admitting they had always known I was more involved than my title suggested. Starting at Meridian Construction was like emerging from underwater after years holding my breath. Patricia introduced me to the leadership team as her new VP of Operations, someone with extensive experience in turning around troubled projects and implementing efficiency improvements. No qualifications about being emotional or needing supervision. In my first month, I tackled a problematic project that was bleeding money and behind schedule, using the same analytical approach I had applied at Silva Construction. That I identified workflow bottlenecks, renegotiated supplier contracts, and restructured management oversight. Within 6 weeks, the project was back on track and under budget. Patricia called me into her office after reviewing my first quarterly report. "Anna, these results are exactly what we expected when we hired you." She demonstrated the kind of strategic leadership that builds companies. Meanwhile, Silva Construction was struggling more with Bruno's transition than anyone had anticipated. Through industry connections, I heard about missed deadlines, cost overruns, and client complaints that started almost immediately after Dad's official retirement became official. The Morrison Medical Center project, the one I had spent months planning and pricing, faced serious problems when Bruno couldn't manage the complexity of coordinating multiple subcontractors and regulatory requirements. The client threatened to terminate the contract unless Silva could demonstrate competent project leadership immediately. Dad came out of retirement temporarily to handle the crisis, but the damage to the company's reputation was already done. Industry gossip spread quickly about Silva Construction's declining performance under new leadership, with several long-term clients reconsidering their relationships. 3 months after I started at Meridian, Patricia asked me to lead our proposal for a large municipal infrastructure project that Silva Construction was also pursuing. The irony wasn't lost on me that I would be competing directly against my former company for a contract worth over millions. I assembled a team and spent 6 weeks developing a comprehensive proposal that addressed all aspects of the project requirements. We analyzed technical specifications, created detailed schedules, and provided competitive pricing based on our operational efficiency improvements. The proposal was 200 pages of thorough professional work. The contract award ceremony was held at the municipal building with representatives from all bidding companies present. When they announced that Meridian Construction had won the contract, I felt a wave of satisfaction that had nothing to do with beating Silva Construction and everything to do with succeeding based on my actual capabilities. Dad was on the other side of the room with Bruno, both looking stunned at having lost such a significant opportunity. Dad's expression was particularly confused because he couldn't understand how Meridian had outperformed them so completely when Silva had been the obvious choice for municipal contracts for years. After the ceremony, Dad approached me in the parking lot. "Anna, I heard you worked on Meridian's proposal," he said, his tone mixing accusation with bewilderment. "I hope you didn't use any proprietary information from your time with us." That I looked at him firmly and said, "Dad, I used the same analytical skills and strategic thinking I always used. The difference is that now I get credit for the results instead of watching someone else present my work." He stood there for a moment, processing what I had said. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, as if he were beginning to question his assumptions about my capabilities and Bruno's natural leadership. But instead of acknowledging that possibility, he doubled down on his original narrative. "Well, I hope you're happy causing problems for the family business. Bruno is doing well and will prove himself once he gains more experience." 6 months later, Silva Construction's performance problems had become impossible to ignore. They had lost 3 major clients, had 2 projects terminated for mismanagement, and faced potential legal action for breach of contract on the Morrison Medical Center job. Dad was forced to come out of retirement completely and resume daily operations, while Bruno was quietly moved to a business development role without real authority. The company survived, but its reputation in the industry was severely damaged. During this period, Meridian Construction prospered under Patricia's leadership and my operational management. We completed every project on time and under budget. We won industry awards for safety and innovation and expanded our market share significantly. I was promoted to senior vice president and received equity participation that made me a co-owner of the company. The most satisfying moment came when we hired several employees who had left Silva Construction due to declining management and morale issues. These were people who had worked with me for years and knew exactly what I was capable of contributing. "Anna, working here feels like Silva used to be when you really ran things," a former colleague told me during a company meeting. "We always knew you were the one keeping everything organized behind the scenes." 1 year after leaving Silva Construction, I was featured in Construction Executive magazine as one of the industry's emerging leaders, with a full-page article about Meridian's operational improvements and market expansion. The article quoted Patricia extensively about my strategic vision and leadership capabilities. I sent a copy of the magazine to Dad with a simple note. "I thought you might be interested to read about what emotional instability looks like in practice." I never heard back from him, but several people told me he had been showing the article around town with a complicated expression on his face. The final validation came when Silva Construction approached Meridian about a potential partnership on a project they couldn't handle alone. Bruno called me directly to discuss the possibility, his tone very different from our previous interactions. "Anna, I need to be honest with you," he said during our call. "The company is struggling without your work behind the scenes. Dad won't admit it, but I know the difference your absence has made. Would you consider some kind of consulting arrangement to help us through this difficult situation?" I appreciated his honesty, but had no interest in returning to a situation where my contributions would be minimized or attributed to someone else's leadership. "Bruno, I'm committed to Meridian now, and frankly, I'm getting recognition for my work here that I never got at Silva. You'll need to figure out your own way forward." The conversation ended amicably, but confirmed what I had suspected all along. My value to Silva Construction had been real and significant, even though Dad had refused to officially recognize it. Without my support, both Bruno and the company struggled to maintain the performance levels they had achieved when I was managing operations behind the scenes. 2 years later, Patricia announced her retirement, and recommended that the board of directors promote me to CEO of Meridian Construction at 34 years old. I became the youngest female CEO of a major construction company in our region, leading a firm that had grown 60% during my tenure. My first act as CEO was to implement a mentorship program for young women entering the construction industry, focusing on leadership development and ensuring capable employees receive recognition for their contributions, regardless of their gender or family relationships. Dad attended the industry reception celebrating my promotion. Standing at the back of the room while I gave my acceptance speech about building inclusive leadership and recognizing talent wherever it emerges, our eyes met briefly across the crowded room, and for the first time I saw something that might have been regret in his expression. After the reception, he approached me near the valet station. "Anna, I want you to know I'm proud of what you've accomplished here," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. "Maybe I didn't see your potential clearly when you were working for us." It was the closest thing to an apology I would probably ever get from him, and I appreciated the acknowledgement, even though it came years too late to change our relationship. "Dad, I hope Bruno finds his own path to success. Silva Construction can still recover if you're willing to adapt to new approaches." He nodded slowly and said, "Maybe it's time for this old dog to learn some new tricks." Then he walked away toward his car, looking older and less sure of himself than I had ever seen him. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dad's emotional daughter had built a more successful company than his naturally talented son, using the same skills and instincts he had dismissed as inadequate for leadership. But the real satisfaction came from proving to myself that I could succeed openly instead of from the shadows. Today, Meridian Construction employs over 400 people and is recognized as one of the most innovative and efficiently managed companies in our industry. Silva Construction still exists, but is smaller and less influential than it was during my anonymous years of behind-the-scenes management. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dad had recognized my contributions and given me the leadership opportunity one had earned through performance instead of gender expectations. But I'm grateful the situation forced me to find my own way, because building something from scratch with proper recognition was more rewarding than fixing someone else's mistakes would have been. The experience taught me that sometimes the best response to being underestimated isn't to prove people wrong, but to find places where your skills are properly valued. Dad wasn't wrong that leadership requires emotional intelligence and the ability to make decisions under pressure.